And Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, and withal how he slain all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. And when he saw that, he arose and went for his life. And he came to Beersheba, which belongeth to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree. And this was his request to God. And he requested for himself that he might die. And he said, Elijah's talking to God, it's enough. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. That'll be all the scripture I read to you because I have so much territory to cover in just a short period of time. But I want to preach this morning on the subject, circumstances that trigger depression. Circumstances that trigger depression. When you study the prophet Elijah, you will realize he was born in 900 BC. He lived in the northern kingdom of Israel during the kingship of the wicked king and his wife that we know as Ahab and Jezebel. If you will study the life and the accomplishments of Elijah, you will find that he is hailed at the same level as Moses in preserving the true worship to the one and only real God, in contrast to the pagan religions of Baal of his day. Elijah's name means Jehovah is my God. Even the politicians of his day commented on the life of Elijah, and they called him the troublemaker of Israel. So many things are listed about this prophet that when you read his life, you think he'd be an eternal example of strength and victory. You would think a man of this caliber would never get down, never be discouraged, and never be negative. I like him for a lot of different reasons. First of all, he was a gutsy man. Elijah steps out of nowhere, nobody really knows where he come from, and he goes right up to the front door of the White House and knocks on the door. And Ahab answers the door, and Elijah said, look, I don't know you, you don't know me, but you're wicked as hell, and your wife's worse than you are, and I just come by to tell you it's not going to rain till I say so. Can you imagine somebody having enough guts to tell the president, I've got the keys to heaven in my pocket, and not one drop of rain is going to fall from the sky until I say so? No doubt Elijah, when he left, Ahab thought he was crazy and beside himself. But 3.5 years later, when not one drop of rain had fallen from the darkened sky, they knew he was a man of God. You know, I don't think a man of God ought to be proud and haughty, but I do think he needs to have some guts about him. I think he ought to be forward and straight and to the point. Most preachers are so gutless, if they were turned into a gnat, they wouldn't even make a splat on the windshield of an automobile. But we've got to get back to raising some men that are not afraid to look people in their eye and tell them what thus saith the Lord. And again, I'm not talking about being mean-spirited. I'm just talking about having some guts about you. We don't need a bunch of pansies in the pulpit. We need some preachers that'll rear back, have some grit in their crawl, and not be afraid to preach. I like him because he was a gutsy man. I like him because he was a godly man. Did you know when Elijah left, he knew the day he was leaving? He told his younger prophet that he was training Elijah. He said, I will go to heaven today. And if you follow me, you'll see me go. That's pretty close to God when you know the day that you're leaving this world. And the Bible said that the fire and the chariots of God descended from heaven. And Elijah went up in a whirlwind without dying and left this world and went straight into the presence of God. That's a godly man as far as I'm concerned. Yes, I agree we need some men with guts, but their lifestyle needs to be backed up as being known as a godly man, a man that walks with God, a man that fellowships with the Lord, a man that's got power, a man that has anointing, a man that is a cut above, a man that's been with God. You remember when they let Peter and James go in the book of Acts from jail, they said they are ignorant and unlearned men, but I tell you this much, they have been with God. Whoa! Give us some prophets that the community will know somebody has been with God. He's a godly man. The Bible declares he was a gifted man. Could you imagine having the keys to heaven in your pocket and having such a relationship with God and such a gift from God that it was never going to rain until you said so? You remember after 3.5 years, a big battle breaks out in 1 Kings chapter number 18. And Jezebel has just graduated 850 false prophets from her Bible college. And they decided to meet Elijah up on Mount Carmel. And Elijah said, I tell you what we're going to do. Here's 2 sacrifices. Here's 2 altars. You offer a sacrifice to your God. I'll offer one to Jehovah God. The one that brings fire down from heaven, that'll be the true and living God. So the 850 prophets started that morning. They cut up their sacrifice and they begin to jump and scream and yell and pray and beg. They even begin to cut themselves and bite on themselves, begging for their God to set that sacrifice on fire. But I know when I read that story, those bunch of idiots didn't believe their God was going to come down and consume that altar with fire. Because if you read it carefully, the Bible said they were standing on the altar when they were praying for the fire to fall. Now you got to be an idiot to believe fire's coming from heaven and you stand where the fire's going to fall. And they hooped and hollered and yelled, and Elijah made fun of them. He said, maybe the hearing aid battery's gone out on your God's hearing aid. Maybe he's gone on vacation. Maybe you need to try it again tomorrow. And they gnashed on their teeth and they screamed till the evening hours and nothing happened. But watch how gifted this man was. He said to his sacrifice, he said to the men to scatter it out on the altar. He said, I want you to fill up some basins with water. They dug a ditch 18 inches deep around the altar, and they filled it with water. They filled the altar with water. They filled the sacrifice with water. Humanly impossible for fire to fall and consume that gift, that offering, that sacrifice. And the Bible said that Elijah prayed 63 words. 63 words. And the Bible said the fire came down and licked up all the water out of the trough and licked up the altar and lifted up the sacrifice. I want to say this, not being critical. When you got God on you, you don't have to pray half a day or preach half a day to get God to move on you. If you're in the right relationship, 63 words could get the job done. He was a great man. How could a man of this caliber ever be depressed? Let me tell you how great of a man he is. When Jesus went up on the Mount of Transfiguration and he was transformed into his glory before the eyes of Peter, James, and John, the Bible said 2 witnesses appeared with him. One of them was Moses, the great patriarch of the Pentateuch of the Bible, the lawgiver Moses. And out of everybody else that God could have let appear to give a glimpse of glory, it was Elijah. I mean, this is a good man. This is a godly man. He's a gutsy man. He's a gifted man. And when you look at him, you'd say, no doubt, he lived in victory all the days of his life. But only one chapter after that great event of bringing fire down from heaven, we find this servant engulfed in a sea of depression. Though depression is the sum total of our emotions, and I understand that, it's usually an equation containing many different things, a mixture of hurt and anxiety, abuse, failure, misunderstanding, circumstances, and experiences. People don't even know, though it's a word we use very much, people really don't even know what the word depression means. The root word of depression is to depress. It's a Latin word that we've gotten from the 14th century, which means to push somebody down in spirit. So when somebody says to you they're facing depression, It doesn't mean there's something wrong in their life. It doesn't mean they're going through trauma. It doesn't mean they've lost their job. It doesn't mean they're having health problems. It doesn't mean their kids have gone bad. As a matter of fact, on the contrary, you can be depressed and everything going right. Because depression is not always an experience of life, but an experience in your spirit. And so many of good people even question themselves, how can I be depressed when things are going so good in my life? Depression is a horrible adversary because it's not seen by the human eye, nor does it have one universal cure. What I mean by that is what may help you get over depression may not help anybody else in this church that's facing it. Therefore, it becomes a complex thing to deal with. Depression can be hid behind a smile, a handshake, a joke, a gesture, or a meal. And all the time, people are looking at you thinking your life is all right and positive and good. Deep down inside your spirit, you're crumbling and you're falling apart to the point where you're even embarrassed to share the brokenness of your spirit. The birth of depression is due to brain malfunction, DNA, mood swings, genetics, stress, medications, or even your diet. I want to help some of you that's never faced depression, and God bless you. But I want to tell you, it's not just a negative thought. It's not a weakness that can be wished away. And it doesn't stop having its effects just because you got a good night's sleep. And in case you think you're in a world all by yourself in this dark place called depression, 264 million people battle it every day when they get out of bed. Depression can get on you quicker than a mother-in-law on steroids. That's quick, man. That's quick. As soon as your eyes open in the morning before your feet ever hit the floor, you could be welcomed to another day of depression. Before the sun ever breaks the midnight darkened sky, you would already be shaking hands with this enemy called depression. Before you ever comb your hair, brush your teeth, or shower your body, depression loves to meet you in the first moments of life. What do we do when we face this thing called depression? Many ancient cultures addressed depression as a demon spirit. Those cultures included the Greeks, the Romans, the Babylonians, the Chinese, and even the Egyptians. The Bible contains many verses and examples that I'm sure the Holy Spirit gave us to help us have victory over this invisible enemy. See, we are afraid to share the fact that we're facing depression because it makes us look unspiritual. It makes us look human. It makes us look weak. So we hide behind the shadows of other things like I don't feel good or that's just my personality. And you withdraw yourself and you make excuses for the fact that in your spirit you're pressed. But you don't want people to know it because it makes you look too human. But may I show you that some of the greatest men in the Bible that ever lived faced the drama of depression. Moses faced depression, and I don't blame him. He brought 2.5 million belly-aching, backslidden Baptists out of Egypt and had to put up with that crowd for 40 years. He had every right in the world to be depressed. I got 250 and you drive me out of my ever-loving mind. Samson faced depression and tried to find victory through honey and a carcass, sleeping with illicit women, and disobeying the commandments of God. David, the great psalmist of Israel that had the ability to play his harp and soothe the spirit of many, faced depression in his life. Solomon faced depression. I don't blame him. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. You imagine having 1,000 mother-in-laws? He had a perfect right to be depressed. Did you know Samson was the strongest man that ever lived and he faced depression? David was one of those most spiritual men that ever lived and he faced depression. Solomon was the smartest man that ever lived and he faced depression. Did you know the prophets of old had depression? Did you know even John the Baptist had depression? Did you know the 12 apostles had depression. Did you know even the Apostle Paul faced depression? He said, I've been pressed beyond measure. Paul said, I've been pushed beyond my limits. He said, I've got more on me than I can stand. So unless you claim to be more spiritual than Moses, Samson, David, Solomon, the prophets, John the Baptist, the disciples, and the Apostle Paul, what makes you and I think that we are too good, too spiritual, and too holy to ever face this thing called depression? Now remember this. The human body was not made to be depressed. Therefore, its lingering presence can take its toll on our mind, our body, and our spirits. And guess what the Bible, in 3 ways, commands us to love the Lord with? Our mind, our bodies, and our spirits. So if the devil cannot get you to drink, if he cannot get you on drugs, if he cannot deliberately get you to fall into sin, he's just as happy to see you lose your joy wallowing in depression. For years, many people have been afraid to address this in their own lives because naive preachers said things from the pulpit like it was a lack of faith, the presence of sin, or just a reality of you doubting God. But today's story reveals to us a great man, a godly man. He was so powerful, he was powerful enough to control the keys of heaven, but he wasn't powerful enough to control his own emotions. I wonder when I look over the life of Elijah, and I've developed this into a 2-part series, so I'll really bring the deliverance mode into next week. But when I look at the life of Elijah and what he had going for him, what was it that was going on in his life that made him fall into a place? Now, this is what Elijah said. I didn't say it. He said, God, I want you to kill me. I'm saying to you, Brother Randy, in the midst of the greatest victory that he ever had spiritually, the very next chapter, he asked God to let him die. Now, I don't want to indict him with suicide, Brother Randy, because that's a very strong term. But I do want to say to you, Brother Mark, he lost all ability and all desire to live. Are some of you here today, behind your beautiful smile and your friendly handshake, have you absolutely gotten to the point where you don't even care if you live? Have you wallowed so long in the vat of depression that you've accepted that this is just the way life has to be? Has the devil convinced you that it can never be any better, and this is something you're going to have to deal with till you die? Before I get into my several points and I close, I do want to answer one question. This is the one that's asked to me repeatedly. And hundreds of thousands of millions will watch this message around the world. And they say to me, Brother Kidd, if I take medicine to help me with my depression, does that mean I'm not trusting God? That is the number one question as a psychologist that I faced while I was ministering to people for over 30 years. Does it mean I'm unspiritual if I take medicine for depression? Let me use something called reverse psychology, which simply means I'm going to answer your question by asking you a question. That's called reverse psychology. If you have a heart problem and your doctor gives you medicine for your heart, which is an organ in your body, to function properly, does that mean you don't love God? Does that mean you're not trusting God? Does that mean you're not a child of faith? Because God has allowed a man to design a chemical that would let you be healthier for a longer period of time. If somebody stood up and said today, I got blood pressure problems, nobody thinks nothing about that. Just take you a pill, quit being fat, lose some weight, quit eating pizza. We don't have any problem with people having problems with their heart. We have people here that have to suck on machines. They can't breathe. They have lung problems. They can't breathe. They have to take treatments at home and they have little respirators in their pocket. Well, I've never seen one of you seen them make that little thing go off in their mouth. I've never heard one of you say, why don't you just trust God and throw that away? If you've ever suffocated and couldn't get your breath, you thank God for that little nebulizer you got in your pocket. Better believe that's right. Nobody criticizes anybody because they got a nebulizer. That's fine. Hey, I'm having trouble. My kidneys aren't functioning well, so the doctor's giving me LASIK to help me get rid of fluid so I don't get edema in my legs and my chest and have congestive heart failure. None of you are going to stand up and say, won't you trust God and throw that away? Because the kidney, a human organ, is having a difficulty. We thank God that God's give people wisdom to develop medicines to help us physically. We're not critical of that. Every organ of the body, we do everything we can to keep healthy until it comes to the brain. And the brain is an organ just like your lungs, just like your heart, just like your liver, and just like your pancreas, just like your kidneys, just like your intestines. And like any other organ in your body can malfunction and not work properly, your brain can as well. It has nothing to do with you being spiritual or unspiritual, saved or unsaved. It has nothing to do with you having faith or a lack of faith. I thank God for those of you that go through that dark pit. I thank God that He's give intelligence to people to design stuff that can help you be more positive in your life, have a brighter future, and enjoy yourself more than you ever before. That's nothing to look down on. So what was it that Elijah could have been depressed about, for heaven's sake? He wasn't married. So, I'm just telling you now. So he had no wife, no mother-in-law, no kids. No kids. The dude's got it made. He's got the keys to heaven in his pocket. God's feeding him. I mean, he needs nothing. How can you be depressed when everything's right? Well, let me show you some things, and I'll finish this tomorrow, next Sunday, Lord willing. Number one, he was depressed because of the direction that his nation had taken. You can't help it. If you love your country, the direction your country goes in affects you. And I don't care who you are. It's just a reality of life. It affects you. And Ahab and Jezebel were wicked and they were ungodly. And she had set up the pagan worship of Baal. And they were trying to push God out. And they took Bible out of the school. And they made fun of the national flag. And they got the word, they didn't know what was a man and what was a woman. And kids didn't know what they were. Yeah. And so the direction of the nation upset him. And it upset him so bad that he became one of the greatest prophets to work hand in hand with an ungodly king. Ahab was afraid of him, but he respected him. But Jezebel was a witch and could not be happy until she knew he was dead. But the country had drifted into paganism. And Elijah, in his short lifetime, and he lived to be less than 60, in his short lifetime, he had seen his nation take a drastic turn to the left, and it upset him, and it discouraged him. Even in his spiritual walk, he was discouraged because of the national direction that his country was going in. Now, I don't think I have to get into great detail to tell you, I'm greatly disturbed at the direction this country is going in. I'm 62 years old and I'm seeing things now I never dreamed I would ever see in my lifetime, brother. I never dreamed I would see the day when illegals can come over here and have insurance and have eye care and dental care, and we can't even afford insurance ourselves, and we can't even take care of our families. I never dreamed I'd see that day happening right before my very eyes. And Isaiah said there would be a day when good would be called evil and evil would be called good. And those days are before us. Who would have dreamed 25 years ago that a president would say at a conference meeting when he was asked the question that an 8-year-old child ought to have a right to determine whether it's really a boy or really a girl? We never dreamed of that, and if somebody would have said it, we'd have laughed at them. But did you know that happened last year in the United States of America? This country is going to hell in a handbasket. And even though everything can be wrong in your life, if you love America and you see the direction of it, if you're not careful, you can get obsessed with that stuff and it can rob you of the joy of the Lord in your life. It was the direction of his nation. I saw an article the other day, and I don't read much. That stuff's just so depressing to me. But it said we've come to the point now where those people that fly an American flag are Trump supporters. Everybody that flies a flag now, you're not an American anymore. You're a Trump supporter. Well, here's the way I look at it now. When I was a little boy, Brother Ronnie, I'd sit on my knees in front of the TV, and I watched the caskets come out of the belly of a C-130 of dead soldiers coming back from Vietnam. None of them had a UN flag over the casket. None of them had a rainbow flag over their casket. They had an American flag. And when those bodies came out, brother, that was in that casket, we wasn't worried whether they were black or white. We didn't care less what color they were. We just knew that some boy, some girl had given their life so that we could still have a country where we could read the Bible and go to church and have the liberties of the United States of America. And I'm telling you, you better hear me well. They're not getting our flag. I'm not changing our flag. We're not changing our national anthem. We're going to keep it just like it is. We're going to keep a pledge of allegiance to the flag because God has blessed this country. The direction of the nation. Number two, could it be that it was the deadness of the churches? God said, Elijah, why do you want to die? He said, I'll tell you why. Because all the churches have torn their altars down. We don't have altars anymore. We have platforms and stages and shows and productions. We don't have altars anymore. We don't have preaching anymore. We have presentations. We don't have sermons. We have skits. Yeah. We don't preach. We serve pizza. And our churches have turned into nothing but social halls. And Elijah had seen not only the nation going bad, but the churches were going bad. 850 preachers, and every one of them were fakes and liars and losers. No wonder people are being depressed. If there's one person they should be able to look up to and have confidence in, it ought to be their pastor. If there's one place they ought to be able to go and feel God and let their life be changed into being a better person, it ought to be the church house. Now you got preachers that are social drinkers and smoking pot and sleeping with women in the church and having extramarital affairs and sodomites fooling around with other men. You got preachers molesting little kids. You got churches that are nothing but whorehouses and social halls, and nobody wants to say anything about it. But oh God, give us a generation of preachers. Oh God, give us some men that'll stand up and tell it like it is to people as they are. Could be the direction of the nation. Maybe it was the deadness of the churches, and I want to close with this. Maybe it was the distress of just feeling like he was alone. God said, look, Elijah, what are you bellyaching about? He said, I'll tell you why. I'm the only one left. You ever felt like that sometimes? And so down in verse number 18, God said, look, let me tell you about being the only one left. I got 7,000 that's never bowed their knee to Baal, and they've never kissed that ungodly religion. You may think you're alone, but you're not by yourself. God has always had a people. He always will have a people. And I feel like some of them are in this building today. So, as I close the introduction of this message, this is how I want to close it. I'm not telling you that there are not times when have not been defeated. I'm not telling you there have not been times in my life when I felt like I wasn't being overwhelmed. Because I'm not going to lie to you. There's times life is difficult. And I don't have the answers to yours and my problems as well. But you've got to remember this one thing, and I'm done. We're not fighting this thing alone. If we were in this alone, we would be of all men most miserable. But we've got somebody on our side. And this is how I want to close the message. I was in school. I was about in 5th grade. And I'd already started fighting and so forth and interested in golden gloves and that kind of thing. But we had a bully in our room. And he was a big kid. He'd failed about 4 years. So that's what most bullies are. They're just idiots that can't pass. And they pick on everybody because they're 5 years older than you are. And so I felt like I could whip him, but I didn't want to fight him. He was a lot bigger than I was. But he kept pushing the right buttons to get me upset and that kind of thing. And so I decided one day that I would fight him after school. So it went out through all Halley School that Phil Kidd was fighting Roy Thomas after church or after school. So school ended that day, and I told my dad he'd been causing me a lot of problems, saying some stuff, kind of pushing my buttons. So I decided we would fight. So we got outside, and he was so much bigger than me, I knew to play on the outside, not let him get on me with his size and everything. And so I don't know how he did it, but he got a hold of the back of the arm of my shirt, and when he did, it flung me down, and he got on top of me. And he probably weighed 35, 40 pounds more than me. I'm flaying, I'm turning, I'm arching, I'm doing everything I can. I can't get him off of me. He's just a lot bigger than I am. But I knew better than to quit. I knew if I give up and he felt that I wasn't resisting, I knew he would just absolutely beat me to death. So I never quit fighting, and I kept arching and turning back, trying to punch upward. I'm blocking his punches. And all of a sudden, from out of nowhere, that dude flies off of me. I mean, it was just like somebody picked him up and threw him. So I jumped up, and I got on top of him. When I did, I put both my knees under his underarms. We called it the turtle back then. You can't move, you can't turn, you can't do anything. And I beat him half to death. I was so proud of myself. His blood was up my arms. Man, I got up, I looked like a zombie, man. I'm walking around there, and I got blood dripping off of me. And I said, anybody else want to fight? Well, clear the house while I'm here. Anybody else in the mood to tackle Phil Kidd? Nobody said a word. I went home, washed my hands, told my dad what happened. I said, I whooped him, won't fool that idiot no more. I put him in his place. I just kept working it out until I got the best of him, Dad. It was tough. He looked rough. But I took care of him. Next morning, I went to school. Barry come up to me and said, you know, if you wouldn't have got some help, you'd have lost that fight yesterday. I said, what do you mean got some help? Ain't nobody helped me. I went through the whole story, how I was flaying and arching, and I got him off of me, and I put my knees, I got him in the turtle. He said, yeah, but what you couldn't see is when you were totally overshadowed by him, and you couldn't see anything but him, you didn't know this, but your daddy stepped out from behind a tree and kicked him as hard as he could in the rib cage. My dad never said a word. When I was bragging, I'm whooping him, my dad said, that's good, son. Wish I'd have been there. I'm so proud of you. But I tell you, it changed my whole outlook when I come to the realization that I don't care how big the enemy is and how much he overcasts me and how much he's going to try to overtake me. I got a heavenly Father that can step out of nowhere and kick him in the rib cage and put us back on top. Put us back on top. I said put us back on top and give us the victory that's in Jesus Christ. Give the Lord a hand clap of praise in his house.